4 essential tenets to an effective prayer life. Listen, all of us struggle at one time or another with the effectiveness of our prayer life. Now, today I want to look at 4 basic principles or tenets essential to an effective prayer life. So let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome back to Reason for Truth. I'm your host, Stevie Garofalo. This is Reason for Truth. You know, the truth comes first, or reasons come last, but we're always and constantly learning, because when we stop learning, we stop teaching, or at least stop teaching well. Before we get started, I want to make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you join my community, StephenGarofalo.com. Don't put it off any longer. All right, getting started. First tenet is that in terms of an effective prayer life, I want to jump right in, is that we need to understand that without faith, it's impossible to please God. God tells us that if our prayers are not authentic, they're not going to be effective. So faith is the cornerstone or the launch pad for our prayer life. So we are beings, by the way, that are created in God's image. And as such, listen, we are able to ascertain the simple truth that prayer is what? Communication. And prayer is communication with God. We all communicate with other people, right? Communication is the key to all relationships. That's human and with God. So for example, it's impossible for you and I to build any relationship. Those perhaps we work with your wife or husband, your children, your neighbors, even your government leaders. If you don't do so, if you don't communicate with them, how can you build a relationship? So when your kids ask you if you would consider something, they're communicating. How would you respond to their request if they didn't communicate that request to you to begin with? And the same is true of God, in that if you have not come before God in prayer and praise, confession, and adoration, there's a lot more to prayer than just asking God for things. Along with supplication, that's asking God for what our desires and are according to His will, by the way, meaning your requests, just in general, to summarize that. We can't do that unless we do so through prayer. So why would God answer a need that was not asked of Him to begin with? Now, granted, God's omniscient. He's eternal. He's a lot of omnis, so He knows all things. He knows, as a matter of fact, what we're going to ask before we even ask, and He knows if we're not going to ask, even when we want or desire or need something. So God sometimes will answer, I guess, a desire, right, even when we fail to pray. But in most cases, I believe that we fail or we miss out on blessings when we fail to pray. So granted, God is, again, omniscient. He's eternal, so He knows all things from eternity, including what your needs are and if you're going to ask Him or not. So we still must communicate those praises, the needs, the wants, because God wants our all. He wants us to be in relationship with Him. That can only happen through communication. And with God, that's called prayer. Lastly, without prayer, it's impossible to please God in our prayer life, to be rendered effective in the first place. So that's number 1. The second tenet of an effective prayer life is a simple one, that we must please God. God is God. We are His creation. He's the uncreated creator. And as such, we are to please Him and not look to God to please us. In order for our prayer life to become effective, we must come before Him with a heart that desires an authentic love for Him and to desire to please Him through communication and prayer. That's number 2. And number 3, the third tenet of an effective prayer life is having an authentic belief that God truly exists and that He can and will answer our prayers. Sometimes we think, well, that's too big for God, that's too little for God. God, He doesn't have time to mess with that. But even when prayers seem unanswered, we have to remember God answers all prayers. And if we have faith and God hears our prayers, even when He seems silent, we're going to begin to see that God is never late. He's never late, period. He's always on time. It's us who are often early. Now, that's number 3. That's faith is materialized through consistent, authentic prayer life. That's number 3. All right, fourth and lastly, the fourth tenet of effective prayer life is our accepting of the fact that God rewards those who authentically seek Him through communication and prayer. We have to simply believe and accept that God rewards those who seek Him, and that sounds kind of strange for some reason, and that seek Him earnestly. And that's primarily through prayer. And I bet most of us are stuck on the word reward here as opposed to the word prayer. God is most interested in you, in making you more like Him through sanctification than any single prayer you might ask Him, in most cases. In closing, remember that we are human, and as such, God wants to make us more and more closer to His image without being Him. We will never be Him. We're not a supernatural being. As such, it's normal for you and I to struggle from time to time with our prayer life, an effective prayer life. The Apostle Paul summarizes what it takes to have an effective prayer life in Hebrews 11. I love it. He says this, "And without faith it's impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him." Simply put, Hebrews 11, verse 6. And that's my prayer for you today. In closing, do a couple things. Make sure, boom, hit that subscribe button. Bam. Sicilian right hook, Gonzalo Sinistro. Bam. Besides that, hey, join my community. Don't wait any. What are you waiting for? It's free. You can join for $5 a month to help us on the operation side. We don't really make a lot of money on that, but it helps us with the cost of facilitating that. And with that, you'll get some Q&A live stream. But for right now, you get the Reason for Truth podcast 1 to 3 days early. So do that at StephenGarofalo.com. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. Let's make sure we're on our knees. We're praying to God daily and throughout each day. So blessings to you. Have a prayerful day. We'll see you in the next video. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo. This is your Reason for Truth for today.